Hi, my name is Jesse Pretorius. I'm filming my interview for Archie's Through the Lens series for Mujo Media. I'm primarily a street documentary and urban landscape photographer. Started in film, did that for a bit. I used to work in music videos and short films over in Perth. Then went and studied an undergraduate majoring in photo media and visual and spatial design. And then I moved over to Melbourne 3 months ago to continue further study, and I'm just here shooting as much as I can, seeing as much as I can, and trying to figure out what I'm doing in life. Like compared to Perth, there's a protest every other week, which keeps it interesting. Thanks. It's kind of, I don't know how it fits into street so much. I feel like with public performances, you know, they're there to be seen, so it's like, compared to shooting natural street where it's kind of getting intimacies and maybe people who aren't out there to be seen, it feels like you're focusing on people who want to be seen. I don't know if that makes sense, but I like the aesthetics of it. I think it's good to cover events and happenings, and there's nothing wrong with it, and I don't think it's necessarily I think it's street adjacent, I'll put it that way. They definitely cross over, street and like the more objective journalist or documentary work, but I feel like they exist a little bit apart from one another, and they have different functions. I think, like you said, street has its space in art. I wouldn't even necessarily classify myself as a street photographer. I'd say like my work kind of falls in urban wanderings, and then that's anywhere from street to contemporary landscapes to close-up shots of, I don't know, a bin with something funny in it. So I'm not necessarily always focused on the people. I kind of see them as an object of urban space, the same as everything else that's out there. So where I'm from in Perth, there's not as much of a street photography community as much as there is here. There's like, you go out shooting in Melbourne and you'll bump into 5 people, but you'd be lucky to see someone with a camera in the city, regardless of what they're shooting. So often you'll find the people that are kind of engaging with the city and exploring the city the same way a street photographer would in tagging or painting. So a lot of the people I used to kind of walk around with in Perth kind of come from that background rather than photography. There's this discussion around what's called, like, in architecture especially, what's called spatial pedagogy, which is basically how different people interact with space, right? Like the best example is a staircase, right? For most people, a staircase is something to move up or move down. But for a skateboarder, it's somewhere to do tricks. For someone in a wheelchair, it's a roadblock that's like stopping them from going somewhere. But that applies to every aspect of the city, right? So like a doorwell, right? It's a portal. But for homeless people, it's somewhere to sleep, to get out of the weather. When you start looking at it that way, you have a lot in common when you do photography with skateboarders and riders and architects and urban designers. And there's a shared language of flaneurism, which comes from the late 1800s in Paris, which is like the act of walking and just soaking in the city and making observations. That's kind of echoed through all those kind of urban subcultures. It's all seeing and interacting with the city in a different way. And I find for my own practice, when you start thinking about the city as not just a place for photography, but like a place for, I don't know, an electrician. What does an electrician see in a city that I don't? Or what does a cleaner see that I don't? Or a homeless person or a skateboarder? They're all seeing different things to me. And if I go into the city just with that photography mindset, I'm blindsiding myself to all the other things to see. A lot of photographers go into photography as like this independent thing. Like there's this mythos of these great photographers, and you know, that's what people want to be. They want to be like the Bruce Gilden, or taking influence from how other people see is far more valuable, because that's exactly what they're doing. You know, Bruce Gilden is a good example, because he has this spatial pedagogy of growing up in a kind of poorer district in New York and having like these interactions with gangs, and I believe his father was a gangster. His spatial pedagogy is that, and then he takes that out into the world, and that's how he gets the pictures he does, because he understands it. He sees through a different lens, so to speak. The derive, right, which it's like the walk, the intentional or unintentional walk through the city, to kind of just like wander and not really have a goal or a target, but to just kind of take it for what it is. And a lot of artists do it. They influence their practice through the derive. It's like, okay, I'm going to start on the outskirts of the city, and I'm going to take the longest way possible to get to where I'm going. That's like anything like that. It's like, okay, I'm only going to turn left when I see a white car. It's just like taking different paths to like the path most traveled, and using other ways to shape your exploration rather than just like intuition. Making rules for yourself about walking through the city. And that's when you find stuff, is when you're not trying to sniff it out, you're just wandering. It's looking for other ways to enjoy urban space. And my theory with that is like, people kind of have their daily routine. Like, okay, you come to the city to go to work, and then you go home the same way you came to the city, and you experience the same thing every day. And it's like, I don't know, that's that drone. You become a drone to your life. You become a slave to your responsibilities. And a lot of people get stuck in that. I think when you try to introduce things to break the monotony in your life, so instead of catching the train you always catch to work, you walk it, or you catch the tram, or you take a different route. I don't know, it can break the monotony, and it can make very dull things very interesting. So that kind of also, like my whole practice in photography comes from that wandering. Perth is like a really boring place. I'm sorry, people from Perth, but I've been there long enough to say that. So you kind of have to find other things to photograph, because you can't do street. You can't really do journalism. You can do landscapes, because there's landscapes, but how can you take photos of suburbs? That was my question. Okay, you look for the weird things in suburbs. Suburbs are built to be driven through and not to be stopped in and explored, because they're not for that. They're not cultural centers. They're places for living, and then you leave the suburb and go to work. That's it. You come home, you stay in your house, maybe you go to the shops, but they're not built to be explored. But because of that, you get really weird things in the suburbs. And I see that reflected in areas like Footscray, where you have had these periods of migration at some point. But you get this kind of weird hybrid suburban culture trying to form in like really random places. A good example is the Corinthian pillars that you see on like, I don't know, old architecture in Rome. You see that in the middle of the suburbs. You see these big pillars, these big grand pillars, entryways into these McMansions or whatever. And that's interesting. And then you start thinking, okay, it's like I'm exploring this second Italy or something, like this different altered space that isn't really meant to be stayed in for too long or looked at too deeply. And I think that's where a lot of my most interesting pictures come from, that kind of exploration. A lot of people kind of get stuck up in the tech side of photography, and it can be hard to break out of that. So if you're comfortable carrying like an SLR every day, do that, mirrorless, whatever. If all you want to carry is your phone, and there's a few friends of mine over in Perth who exclusively use phones. Sorbet Weather and Cultural Detritus, little shout out, exclusively shoot on their phones because they have it every day, and they're seeing things that most people would ignore because they're always in that photography mindset because they've always got their phone on them. And that's the spatial pedagogy. It's using other ways of seeing to get better photos or more interesting photos. Leiko Shiga and her series Spiral Shore, that blew my mind the first time I saw that. They kind of introduced this concept of creating narratives through street and documentary photography, fictive narratives. Thinking about photography, even something like documentary, which is, it's a found format. Documentary and street, you're finding the scenes. You're not necessarily creating them. You don't have 100% influence over what's going to happen. But then being able, either through post or through like selective edits, forming that into a narrative structure was just completely new to me. Changing the way you see urban space and suburban space to find interesting subjects. Because you're not always going to be traveling, and you're not always going to be shooting super interesting journalist stories. A lot of the photography is the in-between of those interesting things. And it's like, okay, you can just not shoot, but then you're not practicing, you're not seeing. Photography is a muscle. And I think if you're not shooting as much as you can, you're not doing everything you can. And I think people should shoot everything. I think if they shoot only on the weekends, they should start maybe using their phone on their way to work and taking photos of things. Because it's the muscle. You're working the muscle. Yeah. Lost my train of thought. I think photography as a medium can often be very closed-minded, and a lot of the conversations I have about spatial pedagogy and urban wandering and flaneurism have mostly been with people in design and architecture. There's kind of the same desire to walk, but maybe with more of a understanding or a reasoning for why you walk and why you see things. And I think it's a shame because I feel like a lot of people in photography could really benefit from trying to look outwards from photography as a medium and bring in other influences in what they do. Because you're never gonna like innovate if you're closed-minded. I think the points of innovation come when you're taking in all these other influences and looking at things like architecture or art or music. That's where you get the interesting stuff. Not by focusing on one aspect of your practice, not by focusing on your camera too much or what lens you do or don't have or you know, I don't know. I think people just need to have a bit more fun with it. We're on our way to Footscray. I'm hoping to get into Footscray markets when they start packing up. You get a lot of really interesting compositions and people in a really condensed space. So I'm hoping I can show you a few good photos today, and if not, at least you'll see an interesting video. What's the time? 4:20. So today I am shooting on a D750 Nikon and a few lenses I'm borrowing from a friend. Mainly going to be shooting zone focus on the 40 and the 28 inside the markets. And I've got a flash cable going to a Thyristor auto flash to get some nice separation with the shadows on subjects. Yeah. Hello, we have arrived at our destination and it is now closed. It's not open on Sundays or Mondays. So we're going to do what any street photographer should and improvise. The reason I came to Footscray initially, I went to Hong Kong in 2019 to shoot for the protests, and quickly found out that I wasn't a war journalist. So I ended up doing more street and contemporary urban landscapes there. And just the grunginess and the grittiness of like the wet markets that you find in East Asian countries is, I don't know, there's so much aesthetic and visual interest in every corner. So it's really easy to shoot. I find it easy to shoot in spots like that. Fruit is just always fun to shoot. Take a photo of this cake. Got it. I feel like I'm always finding reflections in photos. Yeah, I wanted to shoot this last time, but it was closed. Wow. Hi. Good, how are you? Your store's very pretty. Thank you. So in there you had like all these really beautiful statues and jade Buddhas, and then in the background there's just like an exposed wire and like grime dripping down the walls. But it just makes for cool pictures. We'll cut in the photo. So my take is always the best camera is the one that you have with you. And for some people, that's a phone, and for some people, it's a compact, and for some people, it's an SLR or a rangefinder. I think that people get very wrapped up in equipment and brands. I think historically, if you look at the cameras that people shot, the Hindenburg or great events from the last 100 years, if you were to compare those to the camera in your phone, you'd find that the camera in your phone is a million times better and more useful and more capable. But there's such a kind of gate kept thing where you have to shoot blank. 30, 40, 50 years ago, people didn't widely own very capable cameras. And that's kind of led to an increase in people's capacity to, show world events or share photos with family. And I think that worries a lot of people, where it's like, no, you're not a real photographer unless you shoot on an SLR or a rangefinder or whatever. But I don't think that's the case. Photography as a medium is very easy. It comes naturally to most people because it's just seeing and knowing when to press the shutter. Obviously there's skill to it and there's a learning curve, but it's not rocket science, and it's not something like a traditional medium where you have to spend hundreds of hours to pick up the basics. The basics come very quickly. I guess it's the mastery that takes time. After selling my Leica, I've owned every major brand of digital camera, consumer level cameras. They all work, they all take good photos, they all have benefits, they all have drawbacks. There's no one right answer, and I think people should worry less about gear, unless that interests you. If you like the gear aspect of it, don't let it stop you, but it's not going to make you a better photographer. Ooh. Just of the sign. Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you. You kind of have to be okay with awkward moments, I think, doing this kind of photos. In street photography and kind of when you're taking photos with people in it, even in like urban landscapes or whatever, you're gonna have confrontation, and you're also just gonna have like general awkwardness. People are always like, what are you doing? Can I help you? And sometimes, like, even when you can concisely explain what you're doing, it's still like, okay. But you kind of just have to get used to it. It's definitely that cringe mountain thing where you kind of have to be okay with having some scuffed interactions and annoying people and people wondering what you're doing. It just comes with the territory, I think. I think everybody wants to think like they look really cool when they take pictures, but like sometimes I'm doing shit like this to get my flash in the right angle, and I definitely just look like a freak. We are currently heading to Footscray Markets. So we're just here at the Footscray Markets. It's kind of like a wet market situation, very similar to what you find in Southeast Asia, but yeah, right in Melbourne. So what I like about shooting places like this is the density of action. So we've chosen to come here at like 4:30, which is kind of just when things start packing up. So you've got a lot of movement, a lot of people moving around, clean up. It's a very interesting time to be here and very easy to shoot. Just gonna head into the seafood section. You show me a fish? Just hold it. Can I photo with the fish? Yeah, point to it. For a photo. No, okay. Like that. That's a good one. Show me. Thank you. There's kind of more like loose goods, like we'll have a look. Like you get some weird mannequins and like religious stuff, which is cool. Playing cards? Show me. Oh, show your hand. Have a look. You look cool. Who's winning? He's winning?
Yeah,
He's winning. Is he cheating? Little after work, extra, yeah. like where else do you find it? Hi, photo okay? Well, I think shooting places like the Footscray markets is kind of its own challenge, but also provides a lot of sites that you wouldn't necessarily see in the city. So I think it's just about density of action. Like obviously, as a photographer, you can't control what happens, but you can kind of preempt that things will be happening at a higher consistency somewhere or somewhere else. So I think shooting here around the closing time, think like there's going to be action and people are going to be moving around, and you get kind of these interesting shots with especially in the meat section, just animal carcasses and people looking very happy. So it's kind of a fun place to shoot. You know that every time you come here, you're going to get at least one photo that you like. Just in the background, I think someone's auctioning something. I don't know, there's always stuff happening here. I think when you're shooting kind of any street situation, familiarity is always good. Knowing your system, knowing your focal length, knowing how to interact with people, knowing the layout of a place can help. I think there's kind of two schools of thoughts with street and, kind of merging into travel. Like when you go out to a new place, obviously everything is new, so you can see things much more easily. And kind of on the other side, there's the consistency and knowing more or less what to expect, so that you can, you know, focus more on your composition, because you know the compositional elements of the place. I think both are good. I like to try and do both. I kind of like just exploring, so sometimes this isn't what I'm in the mood for, but yeah, the photos always come out well. I got your photo before.
Oh, yeah,
A few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
The reception here very bad.
Yeah. Hold on, maybe I can show you. Not loading. I'll show you later. I'll show you later. Okay, I'll show you. I want another one though, with you, with the chicken feet. Me? Yeah. Like hold it up or something. That's good, man. That's fine. That's good, man. I love it. Yeah, have a look. That's so funny. Thank you. I'll try and get the reception to load. Look at this. There's obvious the purity of a moment in street photography, which a lot of people are kind of protective about. Like they don't want to engage with people because then maybe it becomes more of a portrait. But I think both have a reason for existing, and you get some things out of a pure street photography moment that you wouldn't in a portrait. But then there's things in a portrait that you get that you wouldn't have in street photography. And I think especially with my style of kind of abstract, weird, I don't know, weirdness, where I'm not really just street photography, it's also kind of contemporary landscapes and it is portraits. I think it's nice to get a cross section of different styles of shooting. It's nice to get a cross section of different kinds of shooting, especially when you think about things for the purpose of like a publication or an exhibition. If you just take like, you know, your standard 28 wide angle street photography, trying to stack compositions, a whole book of that or a whole exhibition of that gets tedious, it gets repetitive. It's the same thing over and over again. I think it's nice to challenge viewers with different kinds of shots than what you think of when you say street photography. So that might be like a landscape next to a close-up of an artifact, or a street photo paired with something completely different. Just looking for kind of visual pairs, especially with sequencing in a book or what goes next to each other on a wall. It doesn't always work when you've got two of the same kind of shot. So I think it's interesting to bring in, you know, the portraiture stuff with the more spontaneous street photography and the close-up details and the landscapes, rather than just relying on one mode of showing. So we just got kicked out, kind of. Security guard approached us and just said, look, this is private property. You need permission to shoot here, which obviously, legally speaking, that is the case. In Australia, anyway, you're allowed to take pictures of a person as long as you, the photographer, are standing on public property and the person you're taking a photo of isn't doing anything obscene. So I can stand here, public grounds, take photos across the road onto private property of people, no issues. You have to be mindful where you're taking photos, because sometimes, like in there, you are in private property, and there introduces kind of a grey area legally, where you're not really meant to be doing it, but most places don't specifically say you're not meant to be doing it unless you're kind of approached by security or management. So with things like this, getting kicked out, I just try to comply with whatever they're saying, unless it's really worth it. It's normally best to kind of just avoid confrontation. You don't want to lose your photos. That's kind of the main thing. Like, protect the images you have. Most people aren't too worried. I shoot private property all the time. Most people don't care. We were shooting in there for probably about 45 minutes before anybody came up to us, and yeah, that's more than enough time there.
Attention customers on platform 1.
I've never been in a situation where I'm at risk of losing the photos. It's never gone that far where management or security has said, like, you got to delete that or anything like that. One method I know of is obviously just swapping out your SD cards very quickly, putting the one you're shooting away and where they can't find it. But I don't think it's ever gone that far. Recently I was shooting the Matildas game at Fed Square. I got a media pass and everything. Was shooting some of the wild events and arrests and flares. And towards the end of the game, the police actually approached me and said, you need to leave. If you come back here, we're gonna fine you. Which I still don't know why that happened, but yeah, it's just best to comply, get out of there. You don't want to lose the photos you have. That's kind of the best advice I can give. Just get out of the situation, and yeah. When I shoot street, I don't like to make too many rules about what I can and can't shoot, but I think generally when people go out in public space, there's kind of this consent that's happening where people know they're going to be perceived and seen in public, but that doesn't kind of apply to everybody. I think especially homeless people, they don't choose to go out into the street every day. That's where they live. When you take photos of somebody where they live, understandably they're going to get annoyed. I kind of feel the same way about shooting kids without permission. Like, a kid doesn't really have authority over their movements. When you shoot a kid, they're there because their parents taken them there or whatever. Other than that, I think when people are experiencing moments of weakness or like are compromised in any way, I feel like, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it, and I don't think that people who do that are acting incorrectly, but just for myself and what I feel comfortable with and what I want to put out and publish and put on walls, that just crosses the line for me. But again, there's a lot of people who do it really well, and I think there is something that can be taken from moments like that. Especially in street photography, you kind of have to decide for yourself if it's okay. I don't think that there is any one answer. One person might think that it's totally open game and another maybe not. I personally, all my street work is art focused. I'm not really trying to do anything commercially with it or sell it, or maybe a zine, publishing a zine. I feel like that still errs on the side of an art's outcome, and it's not necessarily like a massive capital gain for me. I do think there's something a bit gross about plastering people who are in those moments of weakness on a wall in an art gallery. It's like the people often that you're taking photos of that end up on those walls are not able to access things like galleries. It's not an inclusive environment where you can put a picture up of somebody and then that kind of person or that subgenre or subculture is going to go and be able to see it. It kind of targets other photographers and people in the arts world, and I think it's definitely a grey area between commercializing work and using it for an arts purpose, especially in third world countries and war-torn countries and places that face poverty. You have this event of parachute journalism where people kind of come in, cover the poverty or the war or the natural disaster in a place and then leave, not really revealing much about the people and what they're going through. And it feels like you kind of lose a lot of humanity with that way of working, and you lose a lot of the personality of covering a story in depth and really experiencing what the people are going through. And I think it's not black and white. Like, it's not to say that somebody can't go into a place and do a good job covering an event or like a war or a natural disaster. But I think 9 times out of 10, the person who understands what those people are going through is going to do a better job. And I think that reflects in the photos and the quality of the content. I feel like the benefit to these Western agencies coming in and covering events is that it does get more exposure, which is a shame, but there's value to both. And maybe it's that people in other countries might be able to cover topics a way that provokes more empathy or understanding for people in that country or neighboring countries or people with similar cultural context. But I definitely think there is a value in considering how much your topic means to you, especially as well in street. It's I don't want to rag on people too much for blasting homeless people with flash, but unless you're kind of trying to discuss it in a meaningful way and have some input and have some understanding, it does end up coming across as exploitative. Not to say, again, that it can't be done, it's just often it's not done well. Another series I'm kind of burning away, slow burn, is what I'm calling the post-natural landscape. And if you look across the road, there's kind of these columns with clouds, and it's the series is about how in an urban world we have these remnants of nature because we've kind of built over nature. I don't know, it just makes for a really interesting juxtaposition between like the very fake natural graphics and the basement we're in. I think it's funny, but also really sad. You can't seek it out. It's just like every now and then you'll just see like a cloud on a support pillar or I don't know, a sign with a forest on it in the middle of a city. And we kind of like, we pave over all this stuff that was there, and then we miss it, and we try and, you know, create this facade of nature, which is, I don't know, strange. This has been Pretorius for Through the Lens, episode 4. Covered a lot of ground today and shot across a couple I'm Melbourne presents kind of a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities for street photography. I'm on Instagram. You can find me at goofy_JPEGs. I have a few books in the pipeline, so keep an eye out for that. And hopefully some exhibitions towards the end of the year. Thank you for having me.
Look over there.